Hi, I'm Susan Simpson, and I'm recording this webinar for people who will be attending the Eating Disorders, Schema Therapy for Eating Disorders workshop that's coming up. And it's particularly for people who maybe only have a short background in schema therapy, or people who would like an overview in the model before attending the workshop. This webinar will probably go for about an hour and a half to 2 hours. And I'm very happy to provide the slide material separately if that's something people would like. Okay. So we will be looking at mode spotting. We'll be particularly looking at the schema mode model today, and looking at, I guess, using an example of someone with borderline personality disorder, looking at schema modes, and then looking at eating disorder variations within that, and looking at some of the schema therapy experiential techniques that are used to work on challenging underlying schemas and modes. Okay, so why would we be using schema therapy? And I guess this is a question that is very relevant to people who work in eating disorders, and as well people who work with anyone with more chronic or complex psychological problems. Generally, schema therapy was developed initially for working with people with personality disorders, but has become used across a wide range of clinical problems over many years, over the past 20 to 30 years. And generally, the schema model grew out of the, I guess, idea that people with personality disorders, people with more complex issues, often experience cognitions and behaviours that are more rigid, and don't necessarily respond to our standard cognitive and behavioural approaches. Often as well, they experience intimate problems that are more central. They have relationship issues. If you think about someone with a more of a borderline personality disorder pattern, there's often this kind of pull-push within their relationships where intimacy problems become very problematic and interfere with their capacity to carry out and function in a healthy way. And I guess the other main issue is that there is a bigger gap for people with personality disorders between cognitive and emotional change. So very often people will say, I intellectually get it, I get that I'm not worthless, but I don't feel it. I still feel worthless, I still feel unlovable. So there is this, I guess, more rigidity in personality disorders. The behaviours and the cognitions are more rigid. And if their strategies to cope don't work, they tend to use the same strategies more. So there's no kind of, there's a lack of flexibility in their ability to cope. And so schema therapy really grew out of the need for a broader conceptual framework, more of a process-oriented psychotherapy rather than a static set of techniques and constructs. And whereas the old version of schema therapy, so that the schema version of schema therapy was focused more on core belief work and cognitive work, the mode work tends to be more focused on emotion-focused change work. So very relevant to people with, I guess, more chronic, complex, long-term eating disorders, and people with eating disorders who also might have a comorbid personality disorder, or maybe rigid personality traits that are interfering with their treatment outcomes, including perfectionism and impulsivity and other factors. Okay, so schema therapy was developed by Jeff Young as a systematic approach that expands on CBT by integrating techniques drawn from several different schools of therapy, including psychodynamic, Gestalt, attachment theory, constructivist theory. And generally it was developed because there were was poor outcome data for CBT for personality disorders, and there was a need for a more specific treatment for deeper characterological problems. So schema therapy has a broader view of CBT. It's more of a process-oriented therapy, as I say, and it's an integrative approach that unifies theory and treatment. And it includes a lot of information from attachment theory, developmental theory, and it combines this into, I guess, four main areas of work within schema therapy: the cognitive, the behavioral, the interpersonal, and the experiential work. And as I said before, it's designed to treat the chronic and characterological aspects of disorders that maybe have developed through childhood and adolescence. And schema therapy expands on CBT, but it also draws on these other therapeutic modalities. There's increased stress on understanding the patient's early history and life patterns, and increased emphasis on the therapeutic relationship. So the limited reparenting relationship, which I'll talk about in a while, is a very important aspect of schema therapy. The therapeutic relationship itself becomes the avenue of change. So as I said before, it's an integrative therapy. There's a greater emphasis on the therapeutic relationship, and the therapeutic relationship is very much dependent on identifying and, to some extent, meeting the core unmet needs of the person. So really, in our assessment in eating disorders, we're really trying to track through the person's history and identify what are the unmet emotional needs that this person has, so that we can start to put more of an emphasis on those things in the therapeutic relationship. It is a longer term treatment focus, but having said that, there are shorter term treatment protocols, and there is quite a lot of research happening at the moment looking at combining group schema therapy with individual schema therapy as a way of, I guess, consolidating and crystallizing the work that we do with people, and also, I guess, reducing the treatment length for many people. There's more emphasis on affect in schema therapy, so more experiential change techniques than in CBT. So a lot of imagery work, historical role play, chair work, working with mood states is very important. So we're not looking on trying to fix affect or to reduce affect in a direct way. We're looking at kind of embracing and being with the client, being with their affect, in order for them to learn new ways, healthy ways of managing vulnerability. And there's more discussion of childhood origins and developmental processes. So rather than on what's wrong with you, it's more on what's happened to you for you to get like this. So where did you first learn that you couldn't trust others? Where did you first get this idea that you were worthless or unlovable? So we're really, I guess, shifting to, looking at learning processes, that looking at through our experiences, we learn our core beliefs are generally learnt, and sometimes through explicit experiences, sometimes more through implicit experiences, but through repeated patterns over the course of childhood. And in schema therapy, we're looking at a shift from specific thoughts and behaviours and emotions to focusing on entrenched core themes and core feelings or modes or states. And that these modes and states include thoughts, emotions, bodily sensations, and memories. So rather than looking at self-harm as a specific symptom, we would be looking at that whole pattern of unmet emotional needs, the function of self-harm in emotional regulation, and so forth. So we wouldn't be necessarily looking, although we might be looking at, obviously we would be looking at reducing self-harm, we would be looking at it as a wider pattern in terms of, let's see how we can reduce self-harm, or let's see how we can reduce binge eating, without then that symptom popping up. If it's serving the function of affect regulation, then it's just as likely to pop up as self-harm, or pop up as another, as alcohol misuse, for example, if we don't deal with the whole picture, and the function that behavior is serving. So it's easy to get stuck in strategies and putting out spot fires, rather than let's look at why you constantly feel a failure, or why you keep getting into these relationships where your needs are not met, for example. So we're looking at helping our clients to identify the function of the behaviors that they've come with. In the case of eating disorders, it might be through looking at restrictive behaviors, looking at compulsive exercise, looking at binge eating, for example, or purging, and looking at all of the function of all of those symptoms, and connecting them to the person's modes and their unmet needs. So there's a lot more discussion of childhood origins and how these patterns developed, and as I say, looking at the entrenched core themes that underlie the symptoms. And this longer term focus is looking at shifting rigid, long-standing patterns of responding and ultimately breaking them, rather than symptom reduction. Okay. So in generally, we've got these two models. The basic schema model is the 18 maladaptive schemas, where we're working with individual schemas and coping styles. And we tend to use just the schema model if someone has 5 or 6 or less schemas. And you'll already have read about the basic schema model and the way it's evolved into the mode model. But the Young Schema Questionnaire measures the 18 maladaptive schemas. So if you use that and experiment with that questionnaire, you'll see that people might have all 18 schemas, or they might have 5 or 6 schemas, and if they have less schemas, we could just use that basic schema model. The schema mode model builds on the basic schema model, where we collapse schemas and coping styles into modes or sides of the self. And we would generally use this for more complex issues, more dug in problems, and very useful with the eating disorder population. So we are really using both models, but we might only explicitly be referring to the mode model, or we might start by looking at the schemas and interweaving this into the mode model. But the mode model might be the standard model that we would use with more complex presentations, and is very user-friendly for adolescents, for families, and for the people who, I guess, are looking at trying to understand their eating behaviours, and maybe other coping behaviours in a way that resonates with the underlying functions, what they're serving. Okay, so if we look at the schemas and modes and developmental needs, generally the schemas and schema modes develop when specific core childhood needs are not met. So we have problematic learning about ourselves, about others, about the world, when our needs are not met. And we're not talking about kind of one-off events here. We're talking about our emotional needs not being met again and again and again. So it developing into a pattern. So if you think about your own clients, and the people that you work with, they might fall into one or more of these categories, these general categories. First of all, insecure attachment would include a lack of safety, a lack of stability, nurturance, acceptance. And very often the schemas, if you have a look at your list of schemas, the schemas in the disconnection and rejection domain would be linked to this. So I'm worthless, I'm unlovable, I don't belong, I'm not safe. Those kinds of schemas and would be linked to this. And if you think in the more, I guess, extreme cases, that might be people who bounce around foster families, abused kids, The parents are maybe not around, or they're drinking a lot, or a parent maybe died, or has lots of partners. The parent has lots of partners. The family's changing a lot. There's not enough stability. There's not enough secure attachment. Mum and dad might not be safe in some way, and there's a lack of stability. And it might also be, that the parents not just emotionally present, so that they're emotionally detached. That if they're depressed themselves or extremely anxious, then the parents not emotionally available to provide, I guess, deep attunement, nurturance, and acceptance. Validation and praise, those sorts of things might be missing. So it might be the more extreme end of the scale, where, as I say, where the person's experiencing a lot of abuse and insecurity in their family of origin, or it might be much more subtle stuff, where there's a lack of attunement, lack of nurturance, lack of warmth. The parent might be present, physically present, but just not emotionally present. Then lack of autonomy, competence, and sense of identity. With this one, this is linked to the schemas in the impaired autonomy and performance category. And this is often linked to hyper strict parenting, where the parent's very anxious, and is maybe overprotective, and not encouraging or praising the child to develop their own sense of competence, or to develop their own identity, that in some way the parent needs the child to stay linked to them, attached to them in some way. And this leads to underachievement and, I guess, continued dependence and a lack of individuation. Freedom to express needs and feelings, and these schemas come under the other directedness domain. So this is where the parents are really, I guess, imposing their own needs and feelings on the child, and it may not be intentional. It may just be that this is the way that they see the world, and that they are conveying this to their child in the same way that they learned from their own parents. But it might be, it's kind of, this is what we expect of you. We expect you to be a doctor. It might not be even explicitly spoken. It's just more of an implicit expectation, conveyed by facial expressions, for example. They're not allowed to be their own self, or to have their own sexuality, for example. Depending on the parent and the circumstances, the child is restricted in some way from being themselves, because of this sense that it disappoints or lets down the parent in some way. So this might be linked to invalidation. It's not really that bad. You're not really hungry. You're not really, just be happy. Just look on the bright side. So their concerns, their anxieties are invalidated, often completely unintentionally, just because the parents may be trying to be sympathetic, but in doing so, really struggling to know how to express empathy. And they may have got the message they should be cheerful at all times, that they need to be cheerful and be happy and not upset anyone else, keep the peace. So the parents' needs and feelings take priority. And spontaneity and play. So this is where these schemas come under the overvigilance and inhibition domain. And this is where there has been a real restriction of spontaneity and play. It may be that one or both of the parents is depressed, or has physical health issues, or is just very ultra focused on achievement, and there's no unstructured time, that all their time is put towards adding things to their CV or achievement, and there's very little time for just enjoyment and having fun. So there might be too much homework, too much silence, too much extracurricular activities. And finally, realistic limits and self-control. And these schemas come under the impaired limits domain. And we're really looking at, where I should be able to do or say what I want, um, and this sense of the rules don't apply to me, where the child hasn't had enough consistency in limit setting. So they may have been able to just do whatever they wanted, or there may have also been, in some cases, a lot of punitiveness, but just no consistent limit setting. So just very, very negative punitive parenting, but no actual help or limit setting in terms of helping the child learn to fulfill their obligations, to complete their homework, to do the things they need to do in order to achieve their goals in life. And so they learn that they don't learn ways in which they can structure their own time and to stick to their goals, even when things get difficult, even when they're bored, even when they're anxious. They don't learn to kind of any tolerance or resilience to do that. And there is often a fear of loss of self-control with this schema as well. So underneath it may be that there is no self-control, that they've had no help with being able to override their urges to act out or speak out impulsively. Or they may have just been given the message. In some cases, some of our clients with eating disorders have been given the message that any self-expression, especially in very emotionally inhibited families, any self-expression is an indication that the child is too expressive, is too impulsive, and so the child becomes afraid that they're too that they will lose control and that others will disapprove of them, and that would be more linked to the freedom to express valid needs and emotions needs in that case. So just to summarize, schemas and modes generally develop through this toxic frustration of needs. So the schemas result from unmet core emotional needs in childhood and adolescence. And these needs are universal. Everyone has them. And it's the interaction between the early environment and the child's innate temperament that results in the frustration of these basic needs. So very often in eating disorders, we're talking about a highly sensitive temperament, highly empathic temperament, where there might be a stronger need for validation, to be seen, to be validated, and combining that with an environment where maybe the parents don't necessarily have the capacity or the tools to be emotionally attuned. So it might be a combination of temperament and too little of a good thing. So, for example, not enough nurturance, not enough attunement, not enough deep level empathy, not enough praise and encouragement. It might be too much of a good thing. So it might be too much overprotectiveness, being spoiled, without any limits being set. It might be traumatization, which would be the kind of more obvious stuff like abuse, criticism, and it would be emotional, physical, and sexual abuse that would come into that category. And selective internalization, which is very, very common for those with eating disorders, where the child has picked up on messages from the parent and maybe assumed that they were to blame for the situation or taken responsibility for difficulties that were happening in their home. So, for example, if the parent was depressed or if the parent was extremely anxious, and the child takes on the message that the parent is struggling and the responsibility for that, and maybe feels that they are in some way to blame if they can't solve the parent's problems or anxiety for them. In other instances, it might be that the parent has very high standards for themselves. They don't necessarily direct that towards the child, but that the child can see that the parent's always striving, that the parent doesn't allow themselves to rest or treat themselves in a nurturing way, and the child internalizes that message and that becomes their own template for living their own life. So the broad goal of schema therapy is to enable our clients to get their core needs met, to first of all, to identify what those core needs are. Many of our clients are completely unaware of and have a blind spot for what their core needs are, to enable them to get those needs met in adaptive ways. So rather than, for example, using for example, if somebody uses self-harm as a way of regulating their emotion, then we would be helping them to identify the needs underneath that and to learn new ways of getting those needs met. If they use compulsive behaviors, it might be compulsive exercise, it might be kind of more OCD type behaviors as a way of developing a sense of achievement, a way of developing a sense of self-worth. We would help them learn adaptive ways of getting those needs met, both internally through the way they treat themselves and through their relationships with other people. So learning to connect to other people, learning to be in relationships rather than trying to, I guess, cut off their needs. In the case of many of our clients with eating disorders, they have learned to cut off their needs, to see their needs as a burden on other people, and to shut down, to self-annihilate. And so that in schema therapy, it's really about going back to the origins of that and helping them to see that their needs are normal, are healthy, and that the message that they had about their needs was, was not a healthy message, and that they can learn healthy ways of getting those needs met within healthy relationships through changing the schemas and the modes, through changing the way that they cope. So that would be the behavioral aspect of it as well at the end of therapy, really changing the way that the person copes so they're not continuing to end up in the same situation with the same underlying schemas being reinforced. So when we're working with more severe coping, when we're working with personality disorders, when we're working with more complex Axis 1 disorders, as they used to be called, so severe eating disorders, OCD, and so forth, we would generally rely on the schema mode model, which collapses down the schemas and modes and is a very, I guess, user-friendly model for both clients and practitioners. And there's not so much to keep track of. If you're working with all 18 schemas at once, sometimes it can be a handful if a lot of them are triggered at the same time. Whereas with modes, we just deal with whatever mode is in front of us at the time. So we need to be, I guess, experts in identifying our clients' modes, and they manifest a bit differently with different clients. So it's really important to be on top of that. But the schema modes are clusters of schemas or schema coping styles, which can be either adaptive or maladaptive, that are currently active for the individual. So if you think about someone with borderline personality disorder, they're continually shifting from one extreme affective state or coping response to another. They might be angry, then they're sad, then they're robotic, then they're terrified, then they're detached, then they're quite labile. They move between these different modes. And therefore, a state model is more appropriate. So we're looking at this kind of shifting that's happening right in front of us. And so it's the moment by moment emotional states and coping responses that we all experience. Some of them are adaptive, some of them are maladaptive. And they tend to be triggered by our sensitive emotional buttons. And this is the kind of mode flipping, where we flip between different modes. And sometimes we'll see that happening with our clients in front of us in the room. So these are, if you think about modes, we all have modes. They're all different parts of ourselves, and they're often, especially the coping modes, are facets of the self that haven't been integrated into other facets. So they're cut off to a degree from other parts of the self. So we all have modes, but in our patients, they tend to be more extreme. They are often more dissociated from each other, and there's greater rigidity and inflexibility. And there's often less healthy adult. So there's less executive control, if you like. Often it's the coping modes, the more dissociated, detached modes that are running the show. And there's no healthy adult kind of at the helm that is directing the person's life. And it's very kind of either in borderline personality disorder, the person might be moving between these different states or different sides of themselves a lot of the time, or in the case of more of a cluster C picture, which again we would see very commonly in eating disorders, more of a perfectionistic picture where the person's stuck in one or two modes most of the time, and often over-identify, overly fused to that mode, as their way of operating and interacting with the world. So the mode work helps us to start to identify the different parts of the client, to differentiate them. And it's the differentiating of the modes that is integrative. So it's only by identifying them, by differentiating them, by understanding them, and setting up these dialogues between the modes that we can start to do the change work. And we can use different analogies to, I guess, describe and explore the modes. This boardroom analogy where we want the healthy adult to be the chairperson of the board, or the mask analogy that we wear these different masks in different situations, and we want all the different masks to be integrated into a whole person rather than cut off from each other as they often are at the beginning of therapy. So there are these four main classes of modes, and one of the goals is to teach our patients to strengthen their healthy adult modes so they can learn to negotiate with, nurture, or neutralize the dysfunctional modes. So if you think about these four different types of modes, the child modes are the innate modes. We're all born with child modes. We're all born vulnerable. This is where the emotional states are held. So if your client attends session in an emotional state or describes feeling very emotional, this is likely to be a child mode. Not always. Sometimes there are some tricky smoke screens with modes that make us think that we've got one and it's actually a different one. But on the whole, if you sense that there is authentic emotion and vulnerability, then this is likely to be a child mode. And we all, as I said, we all have child modes. And the idea is that we're not trying to get rid of those modes. We don't see those modes as bad or dysfunctional in any way, even though our clients often come to therapy feeling as though their vulnerability is a bad thing and they want to get rid of it and they want to sort it out and fix it. We want to shift the emphasis over the course of therapy to help them to understand that their vulnerability is the part that makes them very human, that helps them to connect with others, that helps it to make their relationships work, and that's a part we want to embrace and take care of, and definitely not stamp out. Many of our clients with eating disorders, especially kind of more severe anorexia, often describe not having a child mode. They feel that they're not vulnerable. They're not in touch with their feelings. Excuse me. And generally, this is because they have other modes that are taking up all the space. So these modes have kind of faded into the background, and they've lost awareness of these modes. They've kind of been pushed down because there's no place for them in the environment that they grew up in. And part of our goal then would be to start to identify those modes, to get back in touch with them and to do the healing work with those modes. The second category is the coping or survival modes. This is the way the client has learned to get through difficult circumstances in the past, learn to cope with, I guess, not getting their needs met repeatedly, and find ways either to get their needs met in some kind of parallel way, or in some safe way, or at least to cope and survive. So we'll talk more about them, especially in relation to eating disorders in the workshop. The internalized parent modes are really like an echo from the past. So they're not really part of the client, but the client carries them around in their heads. So it's like the messages we get from our parents, from our caregivers, from our teachers, from the abusers, from our culture. All of these are, I guess, integrated into these internalized parent modes, which are like an echo or these kind of ongoing messages that we hear that sound like they're our own thoughts. They might even be in our own voice, but they actually come from external sources from the past. And so just to look in more depth at the modes, we have the kind of vulnerable child mode. The flavor, if you like, of the vulnerable child mode depends on the underlying schemas, the underlying experiences linked to these modes. So we have, for example, if you think about the vulnerable child, this is the storehouse of most of the primary schemas, and it's associated with intense negative emotions. So the core needs that might be unmet would be more safety, predictability, love, nurturance, um, attention, acceptance, praise, empathy, guidance, validation of emotion and needs. If those needs are not met, then the vulnerable child will be I guess more intense, more suffering at a higher level. Someone with borderline personality disorder generally we would potentially think about their vulnerable child as more of an abandoned child, because there's a very strong abandonment schema underneath. Someone with a very strong mistrust schema, who's experienced a lot of abuse, we might think of that as their vulnerable child as more of an abused child. Someone with more of a narcissistic picture, and also very often with our eating disorder clients, with some of them, we might think of their vulnerable child having more of a lonely child feel. They haven't got enough of their emotional needs met, and they've been very emotionally deprived. Or it might be more of a dependent child mode, especially for someone with more of a dependent personality traits. And the age at which the patient's vulnerable child functions explains a lot about their cognitive style as well. So often someone with borderline PD might be functioning at around about a 3-year-old level, or even younger. They lack object permanence. They can't they can't summon a soothing mental image unless the caretaker is present. So when you're not there with them, they feel panicky, they feel desperate, they feel needy. They live in this eternal present where they're constantly needing reassurance. And there's no clear past or future in their mind, and that increases their sense of urgency and impulsivity. So it's largely pre-verbal, and the person might express emotions through actions rather than words. So that would be an example of an abandoned child for a borderline personality disorder. But often, if they present in this mode, they can appear very desperate, inconsolable, often in complete panic, and often their voice changes to the voice of a child, and they might be very convinced that nobody cares about them. They feel like they can't trust anyone. They feel everyone's going to abuse them or abandon them, and the world is this kind of threatening, dangerous place that holds no future for them. So they're often thinking very black and white in this mode, especially the kind of more borderline patients. And for patients who have I guess, a higher level of functioning, whose vulnerable child isn't so young, that would vary. So they might not be so black and white, not be so extremely, I guess, vulnerable and unstable, or inconsolable. So it really depends. I think then what we often see, depending on the picture in eating disorders, but we, as I say, we would probably see a higher percentage of lonely child, although depending on the overall picture, we might see all 4 of those categories. We would also have a separate mode. So the vulnerable child mode we would call, little Mary, little Susan, little Karen. So that would be the name of the vulnerable child. But as part of our formulation, we're just keeping in mind the schemas that are underneath that, because we know that this person didn't get enough encouragement and praise. So part of what I will need to do in my therapeutic role as the therapist is to be giving more encouragement and praise. Or this person was abused. They just feel like other people are just going to screw them over. I'm going to need to be really transparent, really upfront, really talk of, really preempting any situation that might lead to a therapeutic rupture. So it just, and somebody who's got a very lonely child, very strong emotional deprivation schema, we might be doing a lot of attunement, a lot of listening and validating and empathic work with them. Someone with more of a dependent schema, depending on what the unmet need is, if they haven't had enough of their dependency needs met, we might initially be meeting some of those dependency needs with a view to them taking that on in the second part of therapy and becoming more independent when they reach that developmental stage. Angry child mode is where the person feels intensely angry and preoccupied with feeling things are unfair. And in this mode, they're often uncontrolled. They might be demonstrating poorly controlled reactions, and they're venting their anger. So that would be kind of more of an overt picture of angry child mode, which you might see with someone with borderline personality disorder, for example. With cluster C, generally this mode will be suppressed. So you will see more of a passive picture of anger, where angry child is underneath one of the other coping modes, but it's not fully expressed, at least to us in the session. Impulsive and undisciplined child. The person in impulsive child impulsively expresses their emotions, they lack patience, they act without thinking, they might have a low frustration tolerance, they might appear spoiled and egocentric, and they're seeking pleasure and fun first, but they can't set limits on their own behaviour. And of course, there's going to be a biological component to this. Some kids are naturally more impulsive than others, but generally, through nurturing parenting and limit setting, they're able to learn to set limits on their impulsivity enough to be able to reach their own goals and fulfill their potential in life. Undisciplined child, is really where the person's unable to tolerate discomfort, boredom, and they kind of give up easily. They don't stick at things in order to achieve their goals. Because they've not had somebody to sit with them, to do the homework, to help them to organise their timetable, to make them do the tricky things, even when they don't want to, as a child. And the happy child, which is the part of the client that experiences joy and spontaneity, is the part that we're trying to strengthen and to help them to express genuine affection and positive regard in this mode, to help them become more playful, and to learn to enthusiastically share information about their activities and interests, and be able to get their needs met in a healthy way. Okay, so in this one, we're looking at the coping modes, and there are three main, types of coping mode: surrender, avoidance, and overcompensation. So on the right, you'll see that some examples of coping modes, and in the eating disorders workshop, I'll be suggesting some more additions to these modes, which are, a bit more relevant to eating disorders. All of these are relevant as well, but I guess the ones that I will be presenting are kind of more nuanced, really. And when you think about it, patients develop ways of coping early in life, so they don't have to experience the intense, overwhelming emotions that are triggered by their schemas. And although the coping strategies sometimes help the patient to cope in the short term, they don't help them deal with the underlying problem and the negative beliefs that they hold about themselves or others. So just bearing that in mind, so the compliant surrenderer is the main surrenderer mode, and this is where the person is focused on living up to the expectations of others. They're passive, subservient, They're submissive, they're seeking reassurance in this mode, they're eager to please, always seeking approval through obedience, ignoring and suppressing their own feelings, bottling up their anger, they don't complain. There's this kind of passive aggressive indirect behavior, but their core emotions, they're in touch with their emotions in this mode of core emotions of anxiety, helplessness, powerlessness, driven by the fear of rejection. So this mode is really about keeping the peace, going along with what others want, meeting other people's needs. And in session, this mode might come across where the person is going along with everything you say, everything you want, yes doctor, no doctor, but they're not really expressing what they feel, what they need. And so one of our goals would be to try and get past this mode so that we can help them to develop the capacity to express their vulnerability and their needs in more direct ways. So all of these are ways they've learned to cope. All of these are modes that we would want to be trying to recognize in our sessions, so that, and with coping modes, we're always trying to get behind them to get to the vulnerable child part. We want to get to the child modes because that's where most of the work of therapy happens. So we're always trying to figure out, which mode is my client in now? How can I get to the vulnerable child from here? And often what we will have is a coping mode. So the coping modes are often the default modes that the client spends most of their time in, and can be very much dressed up as healthy adults. So they'll be they might come across in a very socially acceptable way, but they'll be out of touch with feelings or out of touch with their own needs. So the avoidant modes, detached protector and detached self-soother, are where the person's kind of withdrawing psychologically from their emotional pain through detachment. They're just in detached protector, they're disconnecting from others, they're functioning in a robotic or kind of automatic way, they're unaware of their feelings, they might appear distant, flat, kind of tired, bored. They might report, yes, I'm fine, yeah, everything's fine. Or they might be answering, I don't know. The answer to everything is, I don't know. I don't want to talk about it. They don't want to go there. They don't want to do the chair work. They don't want to do the imagery. They don't want to go there. They don't want to talk about anything emotional. They want to stay at a kind of more of a superficial level. Detached self-soother is where the person uses more repetitive, compulsive, or self-stimulating behaviors to calm or soothe or distance themselves from painful feelings. And they're using this as a form of distraction in order to not feel or to soothe themselves in a very superficial way. So in eating disorders, that could involve binge eating. A lot of clients will describe that as kind of almost going into a trance, and quite a pleasurable trance that they in some ways look forward to. So there's this soothing aspect of it that's still safe. Nobody can hurt me. I can still, to some extent, get some pleasure, some substitute for connection without the danger of getting hurt by another person or humiliated or rejected. So it's kind of like a next best thing. I can't get connection. That's too unsafe. I can't take the risk, but I can get some self-soothing through binge eating or through purging or through my compulsive exercise, for example, or through my OCD rituals. So they might take place in a kind of just a detached way through detached self-soother, or it might be through perfectionistic overcontroller, which is one of the overcompensation modes, where it's more about, the function is more about getting on top of the emotions. So in perfectionistic overcontroller, the person's using perfectionism as a way of trying to avoid schemas being triggered, avoid rejection, avoid criticism, avoid being shamed. If I'm perfect, if I'm good at everything, then I won't let anyone down. I won't hurt anyone. I won't cause other people problems. I won't be a burden. And ultimately, I won't make mistakes and lead, disapproval, leading to disapproval from others. So perfectionistic overcontroller might also be using compulsive exercise, for example, or binging. So you want to know, is it ritualized? Is it kind of more of a compulsive picture? Is it more about getting on top of the emotion, in which case it's perfectionistic overcontroller? Or is it just about zoning out, detaching, escape, which would be more of a detached self-soother picture? So this is where understanding the function of the behavior is quite important. And other overcompensatory modes include the self-aggrandizer, where the person might be kind of trying to impress a little bit, might be slightly denigrating or devaluing of others, and maybe acting in a slightly superior or special or entitled kind of way, maybe slightly arrogant or grandiose. They might be self-absorbed or have limited empathy for other people in this mode. And very sensitive to power in relationships. So in therapy, they'll be finding it difficult to tolerate you being the therapist and them being the patient, and they'll try and find ways of putting themselves back up on top in some way, through knowing more than you, or through having read more than you, or through their qualifications, or and at least to bring themselves up as an equal to you as a therapist, rather than allowing themselves to operate as equals, as genuine equals in a relationship, and being able to trust you with their vulnerability. Everything's about competition with the overcompensator modes. And often the self-aggrandizer craves admiration. There might be, the idea is to inflate their sense of self when they're in this mode. Fully attack, they might use threats or intimidation or aggression towards others. And the idea is to get what they want or to protect themselves from real or perceived harm. Also in this mode, it might be more about kind of being blaming of other people. And there are several variations on these modes, which we'll talk about in the eating disorder workshop, but you also have those in the lists that I have forwarded to you. So if you think about in session, someone in compliance surrender mode might come in and say, well, this session was great, thank you very much. Everything's really good, but they might not tell you about when particular problems come up, for example. The detached protector, they might come into session and say everything's fine. But then they just download. They just talk about stuff, and as a therapist, you might feel frustrated, a bit stuck, a bit bored, a bit disconnected, because the client's not really connecting. They're talking about their issues, their problems, things that have happened, but not really connecting with them at an emotional level. They might even be talking about being suicidal, but they're not connected emotionally, so you don't feel it. You don't get a real sense of it. The detached protector can have more of an angry feel as well. So it might be more of a, why do you keep making me do this stupid imagery, and how do it make you feel? Just leave me alone. This is rubbish. Then, where the person, they're not just trying to detach, but they're also trying to push you away a bit, get you off their case, because all these protected modes have the opposite job from you as the therapist. Your job as the therapist is to get near their vulnerability, to do the healing work. The coping mode's job is to keep people away from their vulnerability. So we have to do so they're like security guards, different types of security guards, and we need to work with those security guards to try and get behind and get permission to work with the vulnerable child. Okay. And the final set of modes are the internalized parent modes. And this is where the person has internalized either a very punitive message from experiences in their childhood, such as you're bad, you're disgusting, you're a pig, you're fat, you're ugly, these kinds of very denigrating messages. So the parent modes are always directed inwardly. As a general rule, they're directed towards our own vulnerable child mode, so that the client would have this internal voice in their head where they've picked up on messages that their unacceptable in some way, and then this just plays over like a record, or like a recording over and over again, and like an echo from the past. You're bad, you're revolting, you're disgusting, you're dirty, whatever it is. With a demanding mode or a guilt-inducing mode, it's slightly different. A demanding mode might be more of a pushy mode. So the parent might have actually had good intentions, wanting the child to achieve, but it's kind of misdirected and it's too much. So it's more, where's the extra 10%? You need to try harder. That's not enough. That's not good enough. You need to put in more work. You should be doing more of this. You should be doing more of that. So it's this kind of disappointment and disappointed kind of tone, and mistakes are not tolerable. The guilt-inducing mode is more, where the parental messages have been more about, what about me? I'm suffering too much, and the child's kind of somehow been given the message that the parents suffering, and that they are somehow responsible for that. And so the child has learned, I'm a burden, I'm too much for others. My feelings are excessive and unmanageable. So we'll come back to that. But what we're looking at here, if you think about this as a whole person, as one whole person, this slide, we've got this internal message going on a lot of the time, where there is a parent mode saying either, you're bad, you're horrible, you're disgusting, or maybe more of a pressurizing, you should try harder, that's not good enough, where's the extra 10%? And these messages are being directed at the vulnerable child part, which is slightly different, as I said, for each person. But, these messages make the child feel more ashamed, more lonely, more anxious. If we've always got that message, that kind of critical message going around our heads, we're going to feel ashamed. We're going to feel worse about ourselves. So that inner criticism is part of, it's a big part of what we need to be addressing in schema therapy. But most of our clients will present in one of these types of coping modes. So they'll either present in sessions in a very detached, kind of emotionally avoidant, rational, out of touch kind of way. There'll be more of this happy smiling, going along with things, everything's great, everything's lovely, not standing up for themselves, or more of an overcompensatory mode where they're being very perfectionistic or self-aggrandizing or more blaming and bullying. But there, we want to identify what are the modes, and we're always trying to get past. So if the person's coming in a parent mode, we want to start dealing with that parent mode by fighting back against it, so that we can protect the vulnerable child mode, so that they can start to get the experience of being protected and taken care of. With the coping modes, it's more about getting past them, trying to negotiate with the security guard so we can get access to the vulnerable child part. And this is where we do the reparenting work within imagery and within our general sessions. And so just going back to that slide, the healthy adult side is the side we're trying to build up. And that's this kind of part here, where the healthy adult part is learning to fight back against the internal messages from the past, to bypass these parts of themselves, the coping modes, in order to connect with their own vulnerability and to learn to nurture and take care of themselves. So one of the main goals in schema therapy is to strengthen the healthy adult, so that the healthy adult can be the chairperson, or be the main mode in the driving seat that is in charge, and is making sure that they are in touch with their vulnerable child and getting their needs met in healthy, adaptive ways. So this is an example of a client, Amanda, 33-year-old woman with long-standing borderline personality disorder and anorexia. She has a 21-year history of restrictive eating and chronic depression, high alcohol intake, a lot of suicidality and self-harm. And she compares herself very negatively with others. She's got very low, very poor sense of self-worth, very isolated, and often spend a lot of time in bed. And she first developed her binge purge anorexia at the age of 13 and presented with symptoms of borderline personality disorder, complex trauma, dissociative episodes, severe flashbacks and nightmares, psychotic episodes, which involved hallucinatory images of the abuser and altered self-perception. So a lot of kind of quite severe symptoms with this lady. Also body perception distortion and derealization and depersonalization. So she had a lot of kind of self-critical messages linked to her schemas. I loathe myself. I'm incompetent. I'm hopeless. I'm no good. I'm fat and lumpy. So this, when we put together the mode map, this is kind of trying to show through the shape, the color, the size of the different modes on the mode map, how the modes relate to each other. And you can be creative with this process, and it's plenty of the books include information about the modes. If you look at contextual schema therapy, that's got a good chapter on looking at mode maps and putting mode maps together as well. So for example, in this case, Amanda's got a very strong punishing mode. And this mode was, no one could ever love you, you're a failure, you're bad, there's something wrong with you, you're disgusting. And this message is being directed at little Amanda. So little Amanda feels low, sad, ashamed, dirty, depressed, no one understands me, I'll never get what I need, I'm a burden, feels unloved, feels sad. So this has kind of got all that depression, that anxiety, those symptoms that the clients come in with, that maybe where they feel suicidal, feel sad, feel scared all the time. These are the feelings that are contained within the child mode. Many of our clients with very low weight or very severe eating disorder symptoms are working very hard to block those feelings. So they're spending most of their time in these more coping modes. And with Amanda, when she was in compliant surrenderer, we called it the pleaser mode. So you want to give them pet names, if you like. So the pleaser mode, in this mode, she would go along with what her parents wanted, and she would take on that responsibility for looking after them and doing things for them. Her detached self-soother mode was really about keeping others at an arm's length, blocking difficult feelings, using alcohol, using self-harm, using binge eating, all as ways of detaching and soothing herself. The over-controller is really about, in her case, was really about getting everything right, avoiding mistakes, being in full control of her emotions, eliminating all mess. So using cleaning rituals, losing body weight to eliminate messy body fat. This idea that if I'm in control, I can overcome my feelings of powerlessness. So it's really about being on top. I'm going to annihilate all my needs and feelings. I don't have any needs and feelings. I don't need anyone. I don't need to be in a relationship. I'm on top of this stuff. I am invincible. So it's this kind of sense of I'm trying to be invincible, trying to not have needs, trying to use achievement and as a way of being better than that, and getting as far away from the vulnerable child and their vulnerability as they possibly can. So I'm going to skip over the next couple of slides, but I will be showing you some examples of the different modes at the workshop, so that you can start to get a flavour of how they operate in session. But between now and the workshops, it might be worth you kind of just starting to try and get a sense of what modes, starting to identify the modes, and even use the schema mode inventory for eating disorders as a way of trying to identify your own clients' modes and how they manifest, how the characters of their modes are manifested. And what we want to, in order to identify those modes, we want to look at verbal content, what's the client telling you in that mode, but even more important, what's the non-verbal content? What's the tone of their voice? How are they expressing themselves? Is it kind of quite detached? Is it kind of a little bit, where they're kind of coming across as being completely in control, trying to control the session, trying to take over the session, trying to dominate the session in some way? Or is it, and what's the countertransference? Because this is really important. What's your primary emotional reaction to what the client's doing? Are you starting to feel sleepy and bored and detached? Often that's a sign that your client's quite detached. And what is, if you're starting to feel a bit irritated, or if you're starting to feel a bit like pressured yourself to perform in some way or to get things right, then, you're starting to feel the imposter syndrome, often that's because your client's potentially in more of an overcompensator mode, where they're trying to, I guess, destabilize you a bit to keep you away from their emotions. So we're always asking with coping modes and coping behaviors, what's the function of the behavior? Why is the client doing this? So why is the client, for example, questioning my credentials, or putting pressure on me to find a solution? What's the function of this coping behavior and this coping mode? And that will tell you whether if it's about getting on top or competing or getting as far away from their vulnerability as they can, that's more of an overcompensator. If it's about detaching and zoning out and escaping, it's more of a detached avoidant mode, detached protector or detached self-soother. Or is it more about kind of appeasing you, avoiding conflict, keeping seeking your approval in a very kind of passive way? It's more likely to be compliant surrenderer. Okay, so we're really before and this is something we'll do at the workshop, but might be something you can experiment with beforehand, is just starting to put together a mode map like the one I just showed on the slide, with the where you might want to look for names for the modes, ask your client to find kind of pet names for the modes. For example, the detached protector might be the wall or the blocker or the security guard. The overcompensator might be the dominator, or it might be the checker or the safety mode, or you might have another mode. But then the parent mode or the inner critic might be the punisher, for example. So you can find different modes, and your clients often will have a strong sense of what the function of the mode is, what the feel of the mode is when they're in it, and to come up with a good name for all the different modes. And you can use this, so when you're coming up with your mode map model, or your mode map, you could come up with this first on the whiteboard, and maybe put a couple of the messages from that mode underneath each one to kind of identify it. And I always keep the mode map with me, next to me on the table when I'm seeing my clients, so that we can always come back to it and say, when you're telling me that story about what happened this week, which mode do you think you were in then? And then what mode did you shift into when your mum said that to you? So you're trying to track the modes, help them to start to identify them as they are occurring and triggered in the person's life. Okay. So as I say, if you want to have a go at this before the workshop, just put together a mode map, and you want to have some child modes. You want to have at least one coping mode, and you might also have a parent mode in there, maybe more of a punishing. We might not even call it a parent mode. We might just call it the inner critic or the punishing mode. And you might also have an impulsive child, or a more of a detached coping mode. So just kind of really think about your clients. And as I say, if you use the schema mode inventory for eating disorders, that might help you to get a mode map for your client. Okay, so the goal of therapy, and in this early stage, we're really doing a lot of psychoeducation about unmet needs, trying to get a really good history from your client, and understanding of what their schemas and modes are, so that you can get a good mode map and a formulation that's going to direct the rest of your therapy. And you might ask them to read, do some reading, for example, Reinventing Your Life. I also find with eating disorders, a lot of clients benefit from the book Running on Empty by Jonas Webb. That's Jonas Webb, Webb. and why love matters. Depending on the client and depending on what their unmet needs are, some of these books can be really useful. So the goal of therapy, schema therapy, is to help patients to find adaptive ways to meet their core emotional needs by changing the schemas, the coping responses, and the modes. So we want them to get to a point where they can get their needs met enough for them to develop a sense of self, a sense of autonomy, a sense of their own identity, to learn to feel connected, to connect enough with their own vulnerability, their own inner vulnerable child, to start to feel connected with others, to build self-confidence, and to learn realistic limits and expectations on and to be able to live within that and set limits on their own behaviours. So we're trying to validate their core needs and restart the emotional development of the client. So if they've become stuck in a particular part of their development, say, for example, in borderline PD, it might be the age of 3 that they've become stuck. Someone else, it might be more adolescence, or it might be at the point when their parents divorced, or when they were sent off to boarding school, or whatever the kind of the triggers have been, and wherever they've got stuck in their emotional development, we would be aiming to go back to that point and restart the emotional development from that time to help them to develop through normal, healthy developmental stages. So our job is to bypass the coping modes, and we need to be always thinking, what mode is my client in now? What are they in now? What are they in now? Tracking our own inner responses, the countertransference, tracking what the client's saying, tracking the client's tone, to try and figure out what mode are they in. If it's a coping mode, we need to try and get past it. And if it's more of an impulsive mode, we need to start set limits on it. So if it's more of an impulsive child or angry child, we might need to set some limits to help them learn to control that. And we're trying to challenge and lessen the strength of the parent modes. So we would do that through chair work. We would do that through experiential and cognitive and behavioural strategies. And we would also, the ultimate goal is to connect with and heal that vulnerable child mode. So we're always on track to get to that side. And whatever we say, whatever mode we have there, we're just bearing in mind the vulnerable child is behind and can hear us, even if they're not overtly available to us in that moment. And so we're trying to, over the course of therapy, build and strengthen the client's healthy adult mode so it can take over the driving seat and take care of their other modes.
So punishing yourself is a big theme.
Mm-hmm.
Does that seem
Oh,
right?
yeah.
Beating up and punishing
Mm-hmm.
yourself. So maybe we could spend the rest of the time trying to do something to work on that part of you that punishes yourself.
Okay.
Would that be okay?
That'd be fine.
Now, the term we use in this therapy for what we're now talking about is we call these modes, and modes like different sides of yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one side we'd call that the little child. That would be, little Pam, who's 8 years old and sad and lonely, and no one's paying attention to her. Then we'd have what I would call your punitive mother voice, which is your mother's voice sort of blaming you for things, telling you should be able to do it right, putting you down, holding you responsible. And then we have the healthy adult, which is a sort of logical part of you that's trying to help little Pam to feel good about herself, even though you've constantly got this punitive or punishing mother side that sounds like it's your own voice, but it's coming from her. And you've constantly got it going through your head. Both when you look back at the past, you
Mm-hmm.
view yourself that way, and even now you view yourself that way.
Mm-hmm.
Does that seem like that's far-fetched, or does that make sense?
No, it makes perfect sense.
Yes. And one of the things to put it into the terms of these modes, the punitive, the punishing mother mode doesn't like little Pam. And therefore, little Pam is you. So what's happening is you've got two sides. You've got little Pam, who's the depressed one.
Mm-hmm.
That's the part of you that's depressed and feels you're unlovable and no one would want you. And that's the tar baby. And then we have this punishing mother side of you that's in your voice, but it's her words.
Okay.
And it's the part that keeps putting little Pam down. And she doesn't like little Pam that much. So from the point of view of this therapy, one of the main goals would be to get the voice of your punitive mother away. So it was just the healthy part of you loving and valuing little Pam, instead of this other voice coming in all the time blaming you. What do you think about it?
Okay. So when we look at that, you can see we're trying to help the client to identify these different sides of themselves, and we're trying to help them to identify the goal of therapy is about trying to get rid of that punitive side. And it might not be connected to one particular person or one particular parent. It might be a whole range of experiences, but we're trying to get rid of that inner critic part, and to ultimately to be connecting to that vulnerable part and taking care of that vulnerable part. If anyone had trouble hearing that video, just let me know, and I can maybe see if I can give you access to it another way. It's an old video now, but it's just quite a useful one for showing how the modes relate to each other and how we introduce them at the beginning of therapy. So we're doing the change work in therapy through connection, through attachment-based interpersonal work, through attunement, and helping the client to learn a healthy way of attaching to other people through our relationship with them and through meeting some of their unmet emotional needs. Obviously, we can't go back and completely meet all the client's needs, but it's meeting those needs enough for them to develop through the developmental stages in a healthy way, and eventually to be able to meet their own needs. We use cognitive strategies, we also use experiential strategies, and especially in the second part of therapy, but in eating disorders earlier on, we would be introducing behavioural change as an important part of the process. So the two important parts of the therapeutic relationship are empathic confrontation, where we're continuously, I guess, showing the clients the effect of their coping modes on us and on other people, on their relationships, and ultimately on their capacity to get their needs met. Excuse me. And also limited reparenting, where we're starting to meet their needs in a limited way in the context of the relationship. The therapeutic relationship. So it's just meeting the needs enough for them to get a different experience, an antidote to, I guess, a childhood where they didn't get some of those needs met. And the experiential techniques have three aims. First of all, to trigger the emotions connected to early maladaptive schemas, to help them to be in touch with the schemas at an emotional level, and also to reparent them, to start to do the healing work, to heal the emotions and partially meet the client's unmet needs, and to start to also provide a link between what's happening now, when that person's experiencing bloating or self-loathing or an urge to binge or an urge for compulsive exercise, for example, to make a link between those current experiences and their past experience, what they learned about themselves through early experiences. So the imagery work, the experiential work is really about moving from that kind of rational idea to affective change. So changing the meaning of the memories and the cognitions. And this is essential to help clients to feel better, not just at an intellectual level, but also to start to feel better about themselves emotionally. So this is really important. So I'm going to show you some examples of rescripting, imagery rescripting, and I would encourage you, if you have time, to have a look at the videos on there are two sets of DVDs on the Schema Therapy Training Australia website, and one is on chair work, one is on imagery rescripting, and these are really great sets of training videos that will give you an example, give you lots of different examples of how to use imagery rescripting, for example, how to troubleshoot when things go wrong, when clients don't want to do it, don't want to get involved. How can you get around that? How can you work with that? And the goals are to, first of all, to protect, give them an experience of being protected, to stop any damaging behavior that's happening or abuse that's happening in the image, to do justice, to help them to start to express anger or the sense of unfairness, to fight back against the schemas, and to offer support and safety for the child. So to give them a corrective emotional experience. And to start to fight any guilt that's been put upon the child. This sense that they're somehow responsible for abuse or responsible for their parents' feelings or their parents' emotional state or the parents' depression, to help to start to challenge those schemas that have developed from those early experiences. So we would, in imagery, and we will be doing a little bit of imagery in the workshop, so I just want to go over this. We would be presenting the rationale, and we would do this very simply, and you don't need to spend long on it, but we would be talking about the fact that an intellectual understanding of their schemas has begun, and we want to move from that rational understanding of their schemas, of their unmet needs, to this idea of feeling them, to remember what it was like when they were children and connect this feeling to their current problems. And it moves the understanding of the schema from the intellectual to the emotional. So it really helps them to understand and to make that connection between what's going on in their life now, what's happening in terms of their eating behaviors or in terms of other kind of relationships, and to connect that with the origins of their schemas. So there's two main phases. And in the first phase of therapy, when the client's healthy adult part is not yet very strong, we would be doing the rescripting. We would be going in, taking charge and giving them a different experience and meeting their needs. In the second part of therapy, where the client's healthy adult becomes stronger, then we want their healthy adult to go in, maybe with our help and with our coaching, to help them start to protect and take care of their own inner vulnerable child part. We don't want to start with really distressing images. All of these images linked to schemas are distressing to some degree, but we're talking about little t trauma, not big T trauma. We would move on to big T trauma potentially down the track, without kind of rushing into it, and start with some of the other images. And we're looking to rescript, so it's not exposure-based work. We would stop at the point where any trauma happens, and stop before the trauma, and we reprocess and rescript from that spot. There's kind of no inherent reason to actually relive the trauma itself. And we would also prepare for some kind of aftercare. So we can potentially use safe place imagery at the start and the end of the imagery rescripting, and also potentially, if it's also we're working on big T trauma, check in with the client later in the week, because often their inner critic can become very strong after the imagery rescripting. So we would ask them to get an image. What do you see? What do you hear? What do you feel? Get them to be in the present tense, back in the image, to really feel themselves there as if it's happening again. What's going on? What are you feeling in your body? When you look at your parent's face or the other person's face, what's their expression? How does that make you feel? What's going through your mind? What are you feeling? And then and you can start with a current image. So you can either go straight back to an early image of childhood, or you can start with a current image. Just imagine yourself now looking in the mirror, and what's going on, what's that triggering in you, what are you feeling? So they're imagining themselves in a recent situation. Now stay with the feelings and let your mind drift back to an early situation when you had the same or similar feelings. So this is something I'll demonstrate in the workshop, but just kind of getting a sense of it now for people who aren't experienced with imagery rescripting. We're trying to get them to get back to that childhood origin of the schema, so that we can ask the child, what do you need? What would help? What can I give you now that's going to meet your needs? And then we would take charge and rescript the image. So we're almost like teleporting back to the past, and getting them to relive that experience, but with a different ending. with us taking charge, us giving them a corrective emotional experience. So they start to get, it's almost like we're going back to the past to give them some of the things that they didn't get and that they needed, so they can actually experience that and start to get some of those ingredients that they need. I'm just going to play this video just to give you an example of what that would look like.
So now if you focus on that feeling of being pressured, the feeling that you should do better, you should perform, just stick with that feeling. And now open yourself for images from your childhood. And just staying connected to that feeling, what images from your childhood comes to mind?
So I'm about 12 and I'm sitting at my homework desk, and there's a lot of the lamp's throwing a lot of light on the desk, but my father is standing next to the desk, and
At what side is it? On the left side?
he's standing on the left.
Okay. So you're sitting at your desk, he's standing on the left.
Yeah.
What's happening? Like
I want to stand up and move away, but I can't because he's standing there and he's shouting at me.
Shouting at you?
Mm.
With what words?
Oh, that that I haven't done enough homework, and that I'm not going to get anywhere, and I'll never do anything with my life if I don't knuckle down and do my homework.
Now pause that image for a moment, like you're pushing a pause button at the remote control. So you have a chance to connect to you, be that boy of 12 years old, sitting at his desk. What do you feel like right now? Your dad standing there, shouting at you, telling you should do more, better.
I feel really squashed, and I feel really squashed.
Okay.
And
of course you would.
And it's not fair.
Well, I'm glad that you mentioned that, Greg, because listening to you, seeing that image, it doesn't feel fair at all, and I would like there to be there with you and help you. I don't like it that you feel squashed by everything that your father says. So can you bring me into that image, just to help you out?
Okay.
And where do you see me?
You are standing off to the left as well, but between my dad and me, but further off to the side.
Okay. But a bit in between you and your father.
Yeah, but we're actually really close because I'm so squashed in with the.
Okay. Now first I would like you to give some more air to breathe, some more space. So I would like us, your dad and me, to move a bit further away. Not to leave you all sitting there all by yourself, but just a tiny bit, so it feels not that squashed for you.
Mm.
Is that okay?
Mm.
Okay. Now I'll be talking to your father, Greg. Would like you to just listen in, okay? And I'm saying, well, I want you to stop shouting at your boy. I don't think, and I'm sure this is not good for a child. When you shout at your child, he feels upset, of course, that's a natural reaction. And I don't want you to say to him that he should do better, work harder, and all the things that you say, because it's too much. It really is too much for him. He's 12 years old. You're putting too much pressure on him. He's just a child. Now, look at your father. Maybe try to get into his feeling, into his system. How does he react to what I'm saying?
He says, you stay out of this. This is none of your business. It's got nothing to do with you. He's my son, and I'll discipline him the way that he needs to be disciplined. That he's going to do his homework, and he's going to do it now, and he's going to do it properly.
Okay, then I say stop, stop, stop. I'm raising my hands, not in an aggressive way, but making sure he knows, he understands. It's time to stop talking. And I say, the way that you talk right now, that's scary for Greg, and I will not allow you to talk that way. We use the words of discipline. That's not a way of treating your child. Hey, Greg, I'm there. I'm going to make sure that it's okay for you. Just stick with me, Greg. Hey, listen to my voice, Greg. Can you hear me talking?
Yes.
Okay. Now drag myself to your father and say, your son is a lovely child, and when you pressure him the way that you do, he gets scared. He gets squashed like any human being would be. He's 12 years old. You might mean well, but this is not a way of treating your child. And I'm not going to let you do that to him. Really. You should relax more. Give him an opportunity to breathe. He's 12 years. He needs to enjoy life. Of course there's homework. Of course there's things that he might have to do. But to pressure him that way, that's almost punishing him. I wouldn't allow that. How does your father react to that?
He doesn't know what to say.
Well, that's good. I like it when your father keeps a bit more quiet, because he's talking so much about so much pressure. How are you feeling? Your father's been more quiet, listening to me.
I feel older.
Older?
Yeah, I don't feel like I don't feel like I'm 12.
What kind of feeling is that? Is it a good feeling or?
Yeah, it's stronger.
Stronger? Oh, that's good. I like that. Stronger in the sense that you feel supported? That will release you of some of the pressure?
Yeah.
That's good. I like that. I'm going to say just couple of things more to your father. Is it okay for you to just listen in?
Mm.
You want to say, well, you know, I'm a father myself. Of course, I want the best for my children. I want them to be successful. And I don't blame you for wanting that. I don't blame you for wanting the best for your child. But I'm just saying the way that you're communicating that message is wrong. It's not good parenting for your child. What I need Greg to listen into is that I'm talking about it being necessary in life that you relax once in a while, that you recharge the battery, that if it would just be working all day, all night long, you will be having a burnout. And I don't want that for Greg. I think he's much too special and lovely to be pressured that way. And I'm not saying that because I believe that you can understand it, that you'll be able to change. I'm saying that for Greg. I'm saying because I want you to listen in and hear me talk about the need to relax once in a while, and that it is okay to just fool around and to hang around. And that there is a reality where you have to do stuff, but there's also time to just live your life. And it's not a bad thing. Can you follow what I'm saying, Greg?
Yep.
Can you also sense that I really mean this? I'm not just saying that. So, for this moment, I'm saying to you, Father, so it's okay now for now. I want you to get out of the room. I want this room to be a place where Greg can feel good. Maybe do some homework if necessary, but also have some time to relax. Because after such an argument, after this sort of discussions, then he needs to relax a bit. Because that's the way it works. You do your best you can and they relax a bit. And then when you recharge, then you can move on. So what is it like to see your father leave the room?
It's good.
Yeah.
The room gets bigger. There's more space here.
That sounds nice. And what would you like to do now, right now with all that space? That room that needs to be filled in with laughter and enjoyment and fun things to do.
Pull out the scale electric set.
Okay.
Race cars for a bit.
That sounds good. Well, let's do that then. Let's see us, the two of us, raise these cards. How do you feel right now?
Oh,
What's going on?
I feel like I should be doing my homework, you know? I don't want to...
Hey Greg. Now listen to me. Look at me. No, you don't have to do your homework right now. Maybe in a couple of moments, maybe a couple of minutes, when you feel like you have more energy, then we'll have a look at what you have to do for homework. But really, for this moment, there's just playing around. And that's good. We need that. If you keep on thinking about all the homework, there's no time to relax. That's precisely what your father has been teaching you. But now I need you to listen to me. It's okay. Let go. Let go of all the pressure.
Okay.
And enjoy just to play around now. Okay?
Okay.
Okay. So we will be practicing this at the workshop, but as I say, it can be really helpful just to, if for those with no background in this, just to kind of have a look at some imagery rescripting videos beforehand, just to get a sense of how it works. And you know, the important things to remember are, you want the client to be actually in the image. So you don't want them to be talking about it in past tense. You want it to be present tense, first person. So you're there now, you're looking at your dad. How do you feel? So you want it to be very current and alive in the patient's mind. A real focus on affect. So you don't want to slow it down and summarize and paraphrase. This is all kind of much more cognitive. You want to keep it moving, keep focus on the affect. What are you feeling now? What's going on for you now? You want the client to be in touch with feelings, not in their detached protector mode, but much more connected to their vulnerability, to the child part of them. And really have a sense when you're doing the imagery rescripting of your formulation. What are the unmet needs? And checking in with the client. What do you need now? What are you feeling now? So you're making sure that you can give them a different experience, a corrective emotional experience. As I say, we'll be doing that in the workshop. The other main technique that we'll be using in the workshop is chair work. And often when we're using chair work, it's putting different modes on chairs. So if you see a new mode that comes up that the client's in, we want to talk to that mode, we'll get them to jump in and out of that chair as a way of addressing that mode and helping them to let go of the mode a bit, rather than it being fused to their identity. And especially when it comes to eating disorder clients, so many of their modes, over controller mode, maybe the detached protector mode, this is who I am. I can't let go of that. And by putting it in a chair, then they start to let go. They start to look at that side from the outside and to defuse from it a little bit more. So we might put detached modes, avoidant modes, overcompensator modes on the chair, the coping modes, but we would also deal with those kind of internal critic modes, the punitive mode, the demanding mode, or you can even put specific schemas. If you're doing schema work and not mode work, you might put the defectiveness schema on that chair and get the client to move over to the chair and speak from that mode. So if it's in a criticism, we would need to work out, is it a punishing mode? I'm bad, I'm disgusting, or is it more of a demanding mode? I should be doing more. I'm not good enough. I'm not meeting expectations. If it's more of a punishing mode and we're doing chair work, we need to kind of really be stronger than the mode. So we need to kind of really think of it as we're protecting the client from a bully. If it's more of a demanding mode on the chair, then we need to be really unpicking the argument, using logic more, using more reasoning and reattribution to talk and challenge the mode. So the way that we challenge Senate self-criticism will depend on whether it's got more of a bullying tone, where we need to come in and set limits much more strongly, or if it's more of a logical, demanding kind of mode where we come in softer, but we're still being quite firm and using reasoning and reattribution. So the typical dialogues in schema therapy would be the healthy adult, which we might be modelling initially, but we might have 3 chairs initially. We might have a healthy adult chair, an inner critic chair, and a vulnerable child chair. Or we might have, if we're dealing with a coping mode, say detached protector, the clients come into session in detached protector, we need to try and get past that detached protector to get to the vulnerable child. So we might have a chair for healthy adult, a chair for detached protector, and a chair for vulnerable child. So, and we might set up a dialogue between the healthy adult and the detached protector to try and negotiate a way to get access to the vulnerable child. Or we might be challenging the punishing mode and telling them they're not allowed to put the child down like that, protecting the child. So when we're doing chair work, whatever mode we're doing chair work with, we need to be using the mode that the client is in now. So if the client's in a punishing mode, then our chair work's going to be dealing with a punishing mode. If the client's in detached protector, then our chair work is about getting past bypassing detached protector. Whatever that mode is, we want to put it in a different chair. And the idea is we're coaching them to sit in the healthy adult chair and start to argue back. So if it's more of a critic that we're dealing with, we want to encourage them and teach them to fight back against the critic, to challenge their own inner critic. If it's a detached protector coping mode that we're negotiating with, we're teaching them gradually to sit in the healthy adult chair and to start to try and get past their own detached protector side to get to the vulnerable child, to talk to and care for and heal their vulnerable child. So we're always trying to get them to slowly move into that healthy side. Now, many clients to start with can't access the healthy side. They're very much fused to their detached protector or their over controller. So we might get them to pop in and out of that detached protector chair and vulnerable child chair, and we would play the healthy adult. Generally, it depends on how much the client's healthy adult has developed as to how we would set it up. There are lots of different ways of doing the chair work, and as you become more confident with it, any person, either you or the client, can play any mode, and you can be quite creative and have a lot of fun with it. Detached protector and over controller are very different, very difficult modes to shift very often, and often the client will be quite fused to these modes and sometimes be convinced that they're in healthy adult. So we need to get past it. We need to bring it to their attention. I wonder, could it be that detached side again that we talked about? And so that's why there's such an important focus on experiential work rather than cognitive and behavioural work when we're trying to get past the coping modes, because quite often, especially with our eating disorder clients, they could run their own CBT clinics, because they've got so much knowledge. They've got the cognitive and behavioural stuff down pat. They just still don't feel it to be true. And so the experiential work, the chair work, the imagery work has really got an experiential focus to try to help them to reduce the coping modes, reduce their parent modes, and to get in touch with their vulnerability. So that detached protector mode, they can present in a very kind of detached kind of manner, and they might be experiencing dissociation, depersonalization, boredom, emptiness, but they're very cut off and detached. And that's the purpose of that mode. So you're remembering that this mode, that's its job description, is to keep the client's feelings away from you and away from other people, because it's too dangerous for some reason, and that it's safer to be in more of a detached place. And our job is to convince that detached protector mode or that over controller mode or whichever coping mode it is, that it's a good idea to let us in so that we can do that healing work with the vulnerable child. So we're reminding the detached protector there is a side of you, a vulnerable side that does feel, but you're blocking the feeling. You're blocking that vulnerable side. And through using the chairs, we can gesture this vulnerable side here is the part with the feelings, but you're blocking her feelings. You're not letting her talk about her feelings. We can interview the mode. We can ask them, can you just be that detached side? I want to ask you, when did you come into her life? What was your job? How did you help her as a child? How are you helping her now? So you're really starting to set up a dialogue and getting to know that mode and getting them to come in and out of that chair to answer questions and to play the healthy side or the vulnerable side, and then the detached side again. Then back to the vulnerable side, then back to the detached side. So they really get that sense of moving in and out of the chairs is like moving in and out of their different modes rather than being stuck in one, usually a coping mode. So if the client comes in a coping mode, in a detached mode or over controller mode, we would say, I wonder, could it be that side of you, that protector side? What does it feel like to be in that side? What are usually the signs? And put it on the mode map. This side always says, oh, I don't know. It always says, I don't feel anything. I'm fine. And talk about it. Really go into depth. And how did this side develop? How did it help you? What was its survival value? How did it help you cope? So we're really validating the function of the mode. And we might look at a cognitive exercise of the pros and cons of that mode. And as I say, setting up these chair work exercises. And we'll go into...
So, I've got all of these deadlines at work, and I should have managed my time better. I've just got to get much better at managing my time. I'm not doing that, and I'm not spending enough time with the family, and now the kids are getting all upset, and I just cannot seem to get on top of things. Everything is overwhelming, and I need to get better at this. I should be better at this because I'm not, this is not, why am I different from everybody else? Well, how come other people can organise their time and I can't?
Greg. Okay, just to interrupt you for a second, because when I listen to you, I hear a lot of I should haves. Like it's almost like you're looking at yourself, not liking what you see, and pointing out all the things that need to be improved. Does this seem to be right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So, and it sounds like this has been going on last week, but still it's going on right now. So when it's there, when it's so strong, then let's work with that. And I would like to grab a chair, so I can help you finding your way with this, okay?
Okay.
So, in this chair, hop over in this chair for a moment. Okay. Because in this chair, it will start quite simple. Like, I was listening to you, hearing you look at yourself last week with a lot of I should haves. In this chair, I would like you to be that I should haves. So be that part of you that's things like you should have done a better job, you should have made better planning. Shouldn't be too difficult because it's already there.
Well,
So be that voice and look at Greg, and what do you think he should have done better, and why do you think that?
what, to talk to me?
Yeah, I mean, he's been
Like what?
going
Like,
through
like
his
talk
week.
to myself like,
Yeah.
like, what are you, well, what is your problem? Get on top of things. Like, manage your time better. Why is this so hard for you? What makes you think you're special? What makes you think you're different from everybody else? Because it's not hard. Just manage your time.
Okay. Going to stop you for this moment. Okay, cool. Next, I would like you to sit over in this chair next to me, but that means that if you move out from that chair, I would like you to leave that I should have part behind. That pushing parts that you just expressed, leave that behind in that chair, and you come sit next to me, okay? Okay, and be mindful of the fact that there's a lot of pushing going on. He's talking about you should have, what do you think you're so special, you should have worked harder. I would just like you first to connect to the emotions and maybe answer, how does it make you feel when you listen to all that?
Well, you know, being attached to my emotions is something that I should be doing. I should be more like that. I should be listening more to myself.
Okay. Greg, not to be critical, but it sounds like I'm listening to what you think you should have done, but I'm not asking you about your beliefs. I'm asking you about how it makes you feel when you listen to all the should haves and the tone in that message. Is that a good feeling that you get from listening to what's coming from that side?
No, well, no, because I'm upset because I'm not getting the things done. I'm not getting through the things that I need to be able to get through.
Okay. So, but when he's pointing out all the things that need to be done and what should have been done better, it doesn't feel good, and that is a feeling of being. What kind of feeling is that?
Oh, it's really, what's the word? Just like haywire, like the confused, like. Oh, there's so many things that need to be done that I don't know where.
It sounds almost stressed, like you
absolutely.
feel tensed up.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. Oh, okay. It doesn't feel good. I also wonder, who am I listening to? I mean, these are not words that children start to talk when they begin to talk. I mean, I have children. This is not the way that they start to talk. So, where did you acquire these words? Where do these words come from? Somewhere along the line, this must.
What do you mean? Well, from my dad.
I'm thinking of your dad as well. So actually, we're not looking at an empty chair in a way. It's almost as if your dad is sitting there, saying the same things like he did when you actually were a child. But he's doing it still. He's still pointing out all the should-haves. Does that seem about right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I don't agree with your father. I would like to respond to all the should-haves, and you just sit next to me and listen, and we talk about what's happened. Okay? Because if this is your dad pointing out that you should have been working harder, and also with the words like, "Who do you think you are?" I would just want to say, okay. It's a little bit too much pushing. I mean, you probably you mean well, but at the same time. Greg feels stressed out, and of course he does. I mean, it's not nice to be sort of pushed to work harder. It's just a human being. It's just a sensitive, normal human being, so it doesn't feel good to be pushed so much. I try to get a picture of your father. What would his response be to what he just said?
Life's not a party.
Okay, so this will be his words. Okay. Well, I don't know. Of course, life is not just partying around, but I also really strongly believe that life should be about enjoying life. and not just working your way through life. Like, I realize you probably mean well, but I guess both of us would like Greg to have a good life. So when he's at the end of his life, he can look back and have memories of fun and joy. And also part of that is work, but not just work. I don't think that we would like him to just remember, I mean, working to reach deadlines or something like that. What was his response be to that?
It was really hard to hear what you were saying because he was shouting.
Shouting what?
That you've got to do the work before you've got to do the work. You've got to get the work done before you can have the good time. So that's what you.
I know this is what you point out constantly, but there never seems to be a moment where he can relax. There's always, yeah, but first this, first that. There's always something else that he needs to do. So I don't agree, and I need you to back off a little bit. I don't think that you're totally wrong, but you're pushing him too much. And I don't want you to listen to his words too much. Just take my words in now for a moment. Listen to me. Because I think you've been so overwhelmed by all the shouldas. This has become your reality, but I would like this to become a normal reality for you. It's okay to enjoy life. It's okay to rest once in a while. You do your best, hey? You're just a human being, so there's no such thing as being perfect. Do your best, and you try to have a good and fun life. How do you feel when you listen to my words now?
I was just, that time when you were talking, I heard you rather than him, so that was a bit weird. It was a bit strange, yeah.
Okay. And how did it make you feel when you heard me?
Oh, well, I just all of a sudden had this emotion come up. This, just suddenly. Just tired and sad really quickly.
Yeah. Of course, I can totally understand that this is part of what you feel. And I don't think that your father means it in a bad way or anything, but I would like us to pay attention to your feelings. You matter. It's important to listen to these feelings. It's important to listen to this feeling of being stressed out. So in a way, I'm glad when you listen to my voice, you connect more to your emotions. Even though there might be pain in that, it's good to listen to your emotions, Greg.
Right.
Okay. So maybe what I can do is sort of tape one or two of the things that I've been saying to you now, so you can listen to my voice again when this session is over, so you have a chance to remember it better.
You put it on, like record it?
Yeah, sure. If you have your cell phone with you, then I can record it.
Okay, so this is an example of kind of fighting that was the demanding inner critic, and if it was more of a punishing inner critic, then we would need to ramp it up even more and kind of really set limits. Be strong, like you mean business. It's not okay. Back off. Leave him alone. So it would be a stronger message. So we adjust our message depending on, we have to win. So if it's more of a demanding inner critic message, then we kind of tone it down a bit, but we're still firm. If it's more of a strong punishing message, then we would ramp it up a bit and mean business. So in this one, it's the healthy adult mode, the healthy adult side, us, and in that case, it was Remco as the therapist that was fighting back against the inner critic and protecting the child. And in particular, if it's more of a punishing mode, blaming mode, then we would need to fight back stronger. So for example, if the critical side says you don't deserve to get what you want, you're ugly and disgusting, how could anyone like you? The healthy side might say, don't speak to her like that. It's never okay to treat others in such a hurtful, mean way. She's a good person and deserves happiness. The critical side might come back and say, oh yeah, I don't think so. I know her better. She deserves to suffer. If others saw the real her, they wouldn't have anything to do with her. And then the healthy side would come back. So you as the therapist or you coaching them in the healthy chair might say something like, Marlene's a really kind, genuine person who always cares. She always does her best, but it's never good enough for you. You're too critical and mean. Stop bullying her. That's enough. Stop right now. So we would be much firmer when we're doing that. So we're getting towards the end of the webinar now, and just to kind of summarize, we're talking about really a transdiagnostic treatment here, where we're working on any personality issues, personality traits, the eating disorder, and OCD, any other diagnostic categories. We would be dealing with them all together within our formulation, within our mode map. So you want to really deal with all of those different problems as modes. And we, in Schema Therapy, would be addressing them through cognitive, interpersonal, through the kind of therapeutic relationship, emotional and behavioural change work, with a much stronger emphasis on the therapy relationship and experiential strategies than maybe some other approaches. These some books and internet resources, just some general internet resources. Schema Therapy, a Practitioner's Guide. Schema Therapy in Practice by Arnold Arntz is a really good one. Thoroughly recommend that. That's the end of this webinar for today, but please do let me know of any questions that you might have, and I will look forward to seeing you at the Schema workshops.